Welcome, or I should say welcome to me. I guess you live here and I don't. I came, actually before I was invited to come to this conference, I knew nothing about Iceland and had to look at, we have a globe at home, so I had to go and get the globe so I could see where it was. And I did hear that Iceland was green and Greenland was ice, so I knew that much. But I spent the last 2 days. Monday I did the Golden Tour, and yesterday I went up to the glaciers and saw the volcano that erupted and created all the ash, and the place is just amazing. I was just amazed at all the different nature and environments and appearances, and you leave Reykjavik and there's this beautiful scenery every place. And I was also amazed at a whole island run by geothermal energy. That's the big thing in the world, is renewable energy, and we talk about it in the United States all the time. So we have the Prius and we have other cars that reduce emissions by a very, very tiny amount, and here you have a whole country run by natural renewable energy. So there's a lot to be proud of, even though I know this is not a great time financially for the country. I'm confident it's temporary, and we'll be looking back at this as just kind of bad, vague memory in about 5 to 10 years. So I've spent my time also studying an island nation that has volcanoes and also has earthquakes, and people who grew up on the verge of wondering what the next disaster was going to be, and the result that they had to become very adaptable. It was also a farming-based culture. I guess yours is a fishing-based economy. Theirs was a farming-based economy for centuries. So they evolved a very strong work ethic and also a knowledgeable people. As a farmer, you have to be a generalist. You can't be a specialist and call in the specialists, and you have to just adapt when there's bad weather, dry weather, or floods or earthquakes. And in that context, a small company called Toyota Motor Company was born, and that's what I've been studying and learning about for the last 30 years. We talk sometimes about Japanese manufacturing or Japanese management systems, and if you accept the vision of becoming the first lean island, you could say you're too late because Japan already's done it, but that would be, but that actually be incorrect. Japan hasn't done it. Toyota's done it, Honda's done it, a few companies have done it, but if you take a tour across even manufacturing companies in Japan, you'll see a lot of variation in how lean the companies are and how good they are at learning. Many of them are really incapable of globalizing. And if you go into the service sector, it's even worse. You might buy a small souvenir and 4 or 5 people will deal with you before you actually walk out. And by the time you're done, it's beautifully wrapped, better wrapped than you've ever seen anything wrapped before. But there's a lot of redundancy, and it's very expensive for them to sell you this little souvenir. If you go to a gas station, there's a whole line of people that line up and bow, and they serve you their gas. And again, that's not very efficient. So Toyota's not only a Japanese company with Japanese characteristics, but they're a unique company with a unique history and culture. And I'd like to start by talking a little bit about that. The idea of continuous improvement, Kaizen, is something that is broadly known within Japan, and it is broadly practiced to a degree, but there's a special meaning of Kaizen within Toyota and a level of Kaizen that is unusual. They're not the only company, again, in Japan, but it's unusual. So what I'm going to talk about is the notion of a culture of continuous improvement, and continuous improvement as the way to learning. Now, You've heard already about learning. You're going to hear more about it. You're going to hear that tools are not the essence of Lean, that this is something broader. And then you might ask yourself, why did we use this term Lean to begin with if it means learning organization, systems thinking, focusing on business performance, having a well-thought-through strategy that's linked to your operational ability, that is driven by people who are continuously improving their processes. Does the word Lean really capture all that? And many think about Lean as really just an efficiency program, which is where industrial engineering got started as a way of just measuring efficiency and trying to take out cost. And it doesn't give a picture within industrial engineering of creating a future-looking business strategy. In fact, I was in Finland last week and I spent a day with Nokia, and I was with the head of supply chain, and they're trying to now extend supply chain, Lean supply chain beyond manufacturing, which they did really well, to other parts of the organization. You could argue it's a little bit too late, but it doesn't matter what this vice president of supply chain does. It's not going to save the company unless they have products people want to buy. And right now they don't, or they have a new product with Microsoft that may be the answer or may be the last big step for Nokia. So when we think about an enterprise, you have to think about the whole flow of activity, from understanding what customers want to having products and services they want, to having a way to provide those products and services, to having the various partners and suppliers and network of companies you have to deal with to supply those services or products. And all of that has to work together as a system. And all of that has to be dynamic, adapting, and changing. So we use the term learning. The term Lean was introduced by a graduate student at Massachusetts Institute of Technology who was studying under a lot of people, but he knew Jim Womack and a group that wrote the book, The Machine That Changed the World. And Jim Womack was apparently trying to think of a name for this thing, which was the observation that the Japanese auto companies, and especially Toyota, were just so far ahead of the Americans and European automakers in quality and cost, in productivity, and they're doing more with less. They're making more cars with less inventory and less space. They were developing products that were better and took less time to develop with fewer engineering hours. So he asked, what does it mean to do, what's a word that describes doing more with less? It turned out that the graduate student was a trained athlete, long-distance runner, and he says, lean. If you're a lean person, you can do more with less with your body. And you have to be healthy in a holistic way. And that was the origin of the term. It was not a efficiency program. It was, in fact, I have a slide I'm not showing today, but where I show a healthy athlete, and the athlete decides to get lean by starving himself and not eating. And then the athlete becomes weaker and weaker and eventually can die. And so when I see companies that think that lean is just about cutting people, what I see is that the companies are threatening to die. They're not becoming stronger. So the idea that lean is mean is just a natural association between we're going to be a tighter ship with fewer people and everybody's going to work harder, and that's mean. That was not the original intent. Whether the word was a good choice or not, because it has a lot of different images, it's a word that's hung around for since the 1980s, and there's every country in the world just about has some presence of lean people and lean organizations and lean conferences, so we continue to use it. But if we actually put R in there and called it learn, that might be a better term than lean. Okay, so where did this start? This culture of continuous improvement. Again, culture is about people. It's not about tools. And it suggests that there's something we share if there's an Iceland culture, it doesn't mean that you all think exactly the same way. It means that there's something that you share that sets you apart from other cultures, that would set you apart from Italians and from Australians and from Americans. But there's going to be a lot of variation within people who live in Iceland or grew up in Iceland. And similarly, culture in Toyota, for example, doesn't mean that every part of Toyota is the same. It doesn't mean every part of Toyota is evolved to the same level. If you want to see the real Toyota production system or the real Toyota way in its strongest, purest form, it's in manufacturing and it's in engineering. And then it becomes weaker in other parts of the organization. And over time, there's variation. Certain decades, they've been really, really strong in the Toyota way, and it's very strong across the company. In other decades, they're weaker, and they have to pull themselves back. When Akio Toyoda became the president a little over a year ago, his platform for the company for the future was back to the basics, which sounds strange that we want to go forward by going back. But what they want to go back to are the fundamental principles, the fundamental values, the culture, and at the center of that is continuous improvement. Okay, so the starting point for most companies, and I bet if you look back at your company, you'll find a lot of the values and a lot of the imprinting of the culture in the founder of the company. And in Toyota's case, the founder of the company was Sakichi Toyoda, who was the son of a carpenter in a rice farming village that was not near anything. And so he grew up the son of a poor carpenter in a rice growing region that was not near anything in Japan. In fact, that's where Toyota City is today, and it's still not near anything. The closest city is Nagoya, which is not the most known city in Japan. And one of the things that what he learned is to work with his hands and with wood. And a problem that he saw that greatly concerned him was that women in the community were working their fingers to the bone making cloth, and some was for the family and some was to sell. And this was after working all day for the household and the farming. And he wanted to make their lives easier. He said that in fact, they're working their finger to the bone, and he wanted to find a way to help them because their hands actually were hurting. They were always in pain. And he developed this wood loom. That's what he knew how to do, is work with wood, and that was how you would make a loom at that time. And the only real difference in this loom compared to the older looms was really one difference, and that is that there's a shuttle that has the cotton threads on it, and that shuttle goes back and forth, and you push it back and forth with your hand, and then you tighten the threads with your hand, and then you push the thread back and forth, the shuttle back and forth with your hands, you throw it through. So you're doing two things really, is that throwing motion and then the pushing motion. And he eliminated the throwing motion by using gravity, by creating a chute, a wood chute, so that the shuttle would go down, and then with a pedal you would reverse the chute, and then it would go down the other way, and it would go back and forth just using your foot. So he cut half the labor, and he more than doubled the productivity, and he made life easier for these women. Then he continued to improve the loom because he found more problems and more problems, and every time he found a problem he came up with a solution, and his ambition grew from wanting to help these women to wanting to help the community, which was a poor community, get richer, to wanting to help Japan, which had been isolated from the Industrial Revolution for centuries, and it was very late coming to modern society. He wanted to help Japan industrialize. That was his next big challenge, and his next big challenge was finally to try to contribute to all of society globally. And any of you who have any background in Eastern religions like Buddhism or Confucianism, a central tenet is that people grow over time, and as you grow, if you grow, and many people don't, but if you really mature in your spirit, you will take on bigger responsibilities and become a citizen of a larger group, eventually a citizen of humanity and then of the cosmos. So he was really living that philosophy. One of the inventions, it was just one, he's known as the king of inventors in Japan. He has more patents than anybody else has ever had as an individual. He is known also by some as the father of Japan's industrialization. And one of his small contributions, which turned out to be a big one, was that he also noticed that once he got metal looms that were very fast and they're run by steam technology, when somebody were running, if a single thread broke, then the material would be bad after that until you fixed it. But people didn't notice that it was bad because they're running a lot of different machines and it was very noisy. So he invented a device that would automatically stop the loom when a single thread broke. Again, it was driven by gravity. It was just metal pieces held by strings, and a thread broke and the metal pieces would drop and the weight would pull the string and it would stop the machine. And then he realized that he had another problem, which is you have to notice when a machine is down, when it's stopped. And again, it's a noisy environment, so he created a little flag that pops up, a red flag. And that became known later as an andon. An andon is a red light or light, and it's a signal. And it simply means, I've got a problem, come and help me. And the problem in this case was the loom was broken down. And because it could stop itself and then call for help, it seemed as though he was putting some human characteristics into the machine. The term judoka means an automatic machine that has human characteristics. So he put the human into automation is the way they put it. Okay, so Tsukichi Toyota had several children, but one, Kichiro Toyota, was his oldest son. Kichiro Toyota was sick a lot of his life, and many people thought he would not amount to anything. But his father had faith in him, and he ended up getting a degree in mechanical engineering from the best university in Japan, and he worked in the loom company when it had become a big loom company, and they're making some of the best looms in the world. And his father said, I contributed to society through new kinds of looms, now it's your turn. You need to do something on your own to contribute to society. And what Kichiro Toyota decided to do was to make automobiles. It was after touring the world and seeing automobiles, mainly in the United States, and realizing how behind Japan was. So he came back determined to do that, and originally the automotive company was one department within the loom company. Like his dad, he had a key innovation. His dad, one of his key innovations was a loom that stopped itself. In the case of Kichiro Toyota, his key invention was the concept of just-in-time. And there's different stories about how that happened, but the usual explanation in Japan is that it was necessity, that he was creating a small car company from nothing, and he was competing with mainly Ford Motor Company, but also General Motors was starting up, and these companies were making millions of units, and they were using economies of scale to drive down the cost per piece. So he realized that he could not compete. If he wanted this company to become global and not simply a Japanese company, he could not compete unless he had some different philosophy of manufacturing. And the philosophy was just in time. Now in Japan, again, it was a small island, it's a small island nation where, like Iceland, people are located in a few small areas, so the population density is very high. Unlike Iceland, there's a lot more people. And space is very expensive, so he didn't have space. He didn't have capital equipment. He didn't have a supply base. And with that, he had set as a target that he wanted to catch up to the productivity of Ford in 3 years. And the only way to do that was to eliminate all the slack time. In fact, a number of people from Toyota had visited Ford, and they saw a lot of waste. And they needed to eliminate that waste, and they needed to make parts just when they needed them, because the suppliers were also small companies with very little money, and they couldn't afford to have a lot of money tied up in inventory. So that was a vision of just-in-time. It was not a methodology. So Keiichiro Toyota and Keiichiro Toyota really set then the values of the company, the values of the culture. What were the values really that they were demonstrating, not just talking about, but actually living? And one of them is that they both were driven to contribute to society. So you heard about Drive, the book Drive, and purpose. And their purpose was not just to make money, certainly they needed to do that, but their purpose was something bigger, with Keiichiro first to help the women in the community, and then the community, and eventually to contribute to society. Then he asked Keiichiro Toyota to do something to contribute to society. Keiichiro Toyota was born in a wealthy family, and he could have just run the loom business, but that wasn't enough. He had to do something on his own and create something. Second, the customer always comes first. That the existence of the company is because of the customer. If you, like Nokia is finding, if you don't have customers, you don't have a company. Third is respect for people, and I believe that's partly because of the culture and the religion in Japan, where there's a lot of sense of obligation to other people, and relationships are extremely important, and partly also this particular family. So one of the stories about Keiichiro Toyota was that after World War II, when Japan was devastated, Toyota really almost went bankrupt. This is in the 1940s, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy, but the banks came in and bailed them out. But for the banks to bail them out, they said, you're going to have to lay off several thousand people. You have too many people, your costs are too high. And Keiichiro Toyota had made an agreement with the union head after a long strike that there was not going to be another layoff. And he violated his commitment because of the bank. So that led to, number one, a renewed commitment after Keiichiro Toyota did that. Well, and then also Keiichiro Toyota, after that, resigned from the company. So the story within Toyota is that Keiichiro Toyota sacrificed himself because he violated the values. So we need to live the values for Keiichiro. And the values were respect for people. He violated his agreement. And his agreement was that we were going to provide job security. And the second value is that we do not allow an outside organization like a bank to take control and cause us to violate our values. So that led to a philosophy of self-reliance. So another principle is know your business. The way that Keiichiro Toyota was able to innovate was because he, with his hands, could make the wood. He had great ideas, but he also could make the loom out of wood. And he understood the loom business, and as he grew, he learned more and more about the global wood business, global loom business. And in fact, they sold the last loom that Keiichiro Toyota invented to the Platt brothers of England. They bought the rights to make the looms. They were buying intellectual property, and using that money, they started the automotive company. So the company was really born out of innovation that came from deeply understanding your business, your core technology, a high degree of know-how. And then when Keiichiro Toyota started the automotive company, he felt he had to become an expert on every aspect of automobiles. So they started with engines, and they learned engine technology, and they made some engines, and then they kept on learning different parts of the car. In the meantime, Nissan simply bought the parts and assembled them in Japan, and didn't establish that know-how. And you see the overall the growth of Toyota has far exceeded Nissan. Get your hands dirty. Kiichiro Toyoda's one of his famous quotes is that I would strongly distrust any engineer who came to my dinner table and did not have to wash his hands. Hard work and discipline, which I saw on the tour of Iceland. I saw a film about the family on a farm after the earthquake and the ash, and their roof was covered with black ash, and the whole farm was basically destroyed, but they rebuilt the farm with their own hands, and the owner was out there working just like everybody else. Teamwork, again, that's very natural if you're in a farming community, if you're in a village, if you're fighting against the elements, against volcanoes and earthquakes. You have to band together and work together. Always innovation. This company started with innovation, and the company always believes that innovation is the way out. Their innovation that is really setting them up for the future is, we see it as the Prius, the hybrid, but it really isn't the Prius. It was the idea about 15 years ago that the president of the company said, we haven't fundamentally changed the way we design or manufacture vehicles. The 21st century is coming. We have to be prepared for the 21st century. So the Prius was actually a program. It's part of what they call a business revolution team, and the business revolution team was developing the car for the 21st century. And based on that, the first prototype was the Prius. That was the first learning step, was to make a Prius and learn from that. And then the next generation, And they learned many things. One of the most important things they learned is about battery technology. And battery technology is the key to renewable energy in the future. And about every 2 to 3 years, they've been doubling the power of their batteries through innovation in both the battery and the process of producing the battery. So Kiichiro Toyoda said, it's a big world out there, open the window. This kind of characterizes the spirit of Toyota, is let's not be insulated. Let's always look outside. Now, what I'm describing is the vision of the founders. Again, this goes back to the 1940s. It goes back earlier than that, about 100 years. And I'm describing the culture as being beliefs and values that are shared to some degree by the people of Toyota. But there's a lot of people. Now it's 250,000 just working in Toyota. And they're all over the world. There are 150 countries with Toyota businesses of some sort, and you can imagine that there's variation. And there's always variation. Like I said, right in this room, you're not all the same, even though you come from Iceland. And you're not all the same just because you work for Toyota. But the spirit and this vision is as strong as I see in a multinational company. It's still got a lot of rough edges and there's weak points, but it's stronger than the degree to which it's shared and the degree to which it's deeply felt, and the percentage of the population working for Toyota that understands these beliefs to some degree and puts them into practice from some degree to a very deep degree is unusual compared to other multinational companies. So then Taiichi Ohno was the person who went from the thinking to the acting, from the idea of Kiichiro Toyoda of just-in-time to the reality of just-in-time. And he's given credit for developing the Toyota production system. And he took just-in-time and translated it into one-piece flow. If we were in the ideal just-in-time, we would never make more than one piece at a time, and we would immediately send that piece to the next process that would immediately work on it. There'd be zero inventory, and there'd be zero delay. That, again, that's the ideal, and that provides a vision. That's not a program to be implemented. It's a vision of true north to aspire to. And then eventually this was written down. It was not written down under the watch of Teiichi Ono. Teiichi Ono, in fact, didn't like writing things down. He was always on the shop floor. He believed the only important learning was where the work was done, which is called the gemba. And he also believed that the Toyota production system was always evolving and changing. And he used to say, if you write it down, you kill it, because now it's static. So one of the people that wrote this down was Fujio Cho, who eventually became the president, and he was a student of Ono. And apparently the story goes that Fujio Cho used to make sketches and try to write down ways to explain the Toyota production system, because they had to teach it to suppliers and others. And when Ono saw that, he would tear up the paper. And he would say, if you write it down, you kill it. This is waste. This is pure, muda is a term for waste. This is just muda. And he'd throw away the paper. But eventually he couldn't tear the paper up as fast as they could write it down. And the house became the symbol, because the thinking was a house is like a system. If any part of the house is weak, then the whole system is weak. So you can have a great foundation, but there's nothing on it. Or you can have a great house and a weak roof, and then water comes in and it destroys the house. Or the structures aren't strong, and therefore the walls start to crack and collapse. So any part of the system that's weak will bring down the house. And the system that has to work together in harmony begins with a foundation, and the foundation is operational stability. Basically means things, for the most part, work when they're supposed to, in the way they're supposed to, producing the quality they're supposed to. And the parts can be people or they can be equipment. So the equipment has to be extremely well maintained, and often that's referred to as total productive maintenance. And the people have to be extremely well developed and maintained. And that means that they have to, like Sakichi Toyota and Kichiro Toyota, they have to learn their craft deeply. And they have to be continually trained and updated, so their skills are constantly being updated. That in that drive model is the mastery. You have to master your job. And that, again, was very, very common or very natural in the environment in Japan, where they had grown up as a culture of farmers and skilled trades like carpenters, and the master-apprentice relationship was very, very strong. And even outside of that, in, say, a classroom or any place, the culture says you should respect your elders who have more wisdom and know more than you do. And your elders are taught they should always be taking every opportunity possible to teach the next generation. Oh, by the way, you can see the parts that just-in-time Kichiro developed. That's one pillar. Judoka, stop and fix problems, became the second pillar. These became broader as they learned more about just-in-time, as they learned more about building in quality. They became really broader philosophies, but they started with the two founders, so they each have a pillar. And then in the center is continuous improvement. It's people continuously improving. Oh, and the goals at the top, by the way, are not just efficiency, but they include safety of the product, but also safety mainly of the people who work for you. That's what they're referring to there. Quality, total quality of the product, productivity, delivery on time, and having high morale of your people. And those are the things they still measure today all over the world in Toyota. So this is not a program for one thing like efficiency. It's a way of doing business for your entire business and all your objectives. Okay, so the starting point when Ono started working was that almost every company, and it was true of the American car companies, were batch manufacturers, and so was Toyota originally making looms. By batch manufacturing, I mean you make a lot of one kind of part, then you change over, and then you make a lot of another kind of part, and then you move those large batches and you set down inventory by another machine that is working off that inventory. And each operation is trying to maximize the efficiency of that operation. And then whatever they make, they push to the next process. And what Ono did was to set up flow. One of his first experiments was in a machine shop where he took machines that were different, like a lathe and a drilling machine, and he put them into a circle, or almost a circle, a U, and then he was really focusing on how material flowed from station to station, and the workers had to be multi-skilled because he wanted to be able to run this cell at different levels of output depending on customer demand and still have the same productivity. So if demand is cut in half, you take half the people out of there, and each person has to do twice as many jobs, just slower. So the cell works slower, but they're doing the same jobs. So you're adjusting people up and down, and therefore the people have to have the flexibility to do whatever jobs are required as you rebalance the cell based on demand. As you can see in this picture, it looks like a cell and it looks like flow, but it doesn't look like one-piece flow. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of inventory, and in fact, when Ono started to experiment, he had a vision of one-piece flow. He set up the cell, and it was kind of like this. It was very rough, and people were not working at the same speed, and some people were mad because they only wanted to do one job, and it took a lot of time and a lot of attention by Ono. He said he had to be at the shop floor every day, teaching, encouraging, coaching, to begin through continuous improvement to get to the point of this, where it literally was make one, move one, make one, move one. And he gained an appreciation for the human element, for how important it was to train and develop the people, because the concept was just a concept. It was, and you could physically move the machines near each other very easily, but getting the people to function in one-piece flow meant that they had to have the desire, and they had to learn new skills, and also things go wrong that prevent flow. Machines break down, somebody comes in who's not well trained, and you have to continuously train people, deal with breakdowns, deal with raw materials that are not the raw materials. So you have to continuously adapt and learn in order to continue to achieve one-piece flow and get better and better at being more flexible, at reducing inventory or the batch sizes even more. If we now generalize this to an organization, not just one cell, we see that we have not different machines like a lathe and a drill, but we have different specialties now, like sales and marketing and production and supply chain, and we have all these departments, and again, what the departments naturally do is what's best for them as a department. They do whatever they're supposed to do really well. Sales sells a lot, and human resources generates a lot of paperwork, and the supply chain buys parts as cheaply as possible. And engineering's not up there, but they're trying to create the perfect product no matter what it costs, and whether it's hard to build or not. So if you think about flow, now one-piece flow, you would have each department treating the next department as a customer and giving them what they want in the amount they want when they want it. And that flow would include the business strategy that allows you to grow your business. It would include how you fulfill customer orders, which is the manufacturing, service, operational excellence process. And it would also include growing and developing people, because that's the way you get people who are motivated to improve, to learn. There's just too much going on in any company for one person to be the genius that is doing all the learning for the organization. So what you find is that the problems are, some of them are inside each department, but some of the biggest opportunities are between departments. And when you try to get flow, you have to get these departments to coordinate, work together, and focus ultimately on the customer. And in order to get people to do that, they have to feel that they're respected. They have to feel that there's some partnership. They have to feel a purpose. Like the book Drive says, there's a purpose more than just, I'm working because people above me want to make more money. Very few people are motivated by that. So the way that Toyota drives the model is that there is an exchange. An exchange is not a little exchange like I come up with an idea and I get paid some money, but a big exchange over a long period of time, which is that as the organization prospers, the employees prosper. They have secure jobs, they have a good quality of work life, they have bonuses related to how the company does, and then people who feel like they're part of this broader enterprise with a broader purpose have to be motivated to continuously improve and get satisfaction that they're contributing their ideas, they see their ideas turn into practice. That develops a lot of motivation. It's called intrinsic motivation because it comes from inside, from doing something special and seeing the results, not from outside, from somebody pays me because I thought of an idea, and if they stop paying me, I'm going to stop thinking. So this is a virtual cycle where the employees and the company are working in harmony, and at the center has to be trust. None of this is easy, and none of this comes naturally. It all has to be worked on every day. You have to constantly work to maintain trust. You have to constantly work to develop your employees so they actually have the skills to improve and see the results of their great thinking and their innovation. Then when we understand more deeply the culture of Toyota and where the company came from, and then we can maybe appreciate what Ono really learned from continuous flow and from reducing inventory. And what he learned was that the more inventory you have, the less people think. Because if there's a lot of inventory, if there's a lot of slack in the system, and it could be time buffers between departments, I deliver within some time window, and then you take what you need, and it could be a sell, and eventually somebody else someplace makes it. We're not connected. And when you're not connected, you could work on your own, and it's relatively easy, and it doesn't require as much thinking as when we try to coordinate, when we try to understand somebody else's point of view. So what the general principle is that the more slack in the system, the more forgiving the system is, and the less pressure I have to learn and grow. And the way I learn and grow is because problems keep on surfacing, and the less slack, the more immediate the pressure is to solve the problem now. And that pressure then causes me to become better, smarter, more confident, and better able to deal with problems in the future. So when we look at the tools of Lean, these are a few of the tools. Standardized work, we heard that standardized work in classical management became a method to make us robots, right? So standardized work was, here's what you do, here's the steps, do it exactly this way in this amount of time. And in the Toyota system, the standard has as a main purpose a way of detecting deviations from the standard. If you have no standard, you don't know whether you're doing well or not. If you have a standard and you see a deviation, then that deviation becomes a problem that we can solve. We have a standard time, we have a standard method, we think it's the best method. One problem is that somebody can't keep up with production. And we immediately see that because the production is below what we expect. Then we have to find the root cause of the problem. Another problem is somebody's working faster than the standard. It's easy, and they're not following the standard method. That's another problem. It means that this person has found a better standard, and if they haven't shared it with anybody else to create a new standard, that's an organizational problem. So what the standards do, and 5S, which is a way of keeping the workplace orderly, neat, and visual, so I know what should be happening in the workplace. And when I know what should be happening, I can compare it to what is happening, and that defines the problems. And then when we see the normalities, we need some system for that. And again, in the case of the loom, it was a little flag that popped up because a thread broke. So there's a deviation from the standard. The thread is supposed to be continuous and not break and high quality. And then when there's a deviation, you see a red flag. That's very visual, easy to understand. There's a problem. So we set up visual control systems and ways of responding when there's a problem so that we can check for abnormalities and notice them very, very quickly, immediately when they occur. And then finally, the problem-solving process allows us to do Kaizen. The way Toyota later wrote down their philosophy, their culture in 2001 was through this different house. TPS was for manufacturing, but this is a broader view. And this broad view, the two pillars are respect for people and continuous improvement. And it was introduced by Fujio Cho, who said that this is a standard and a guiding beacon. Again, like a standard, we can tell if we're in standard or not in standard. We can find the problems. Respect for people is detailed what that means. And if we're not showing that respect for people, then we are deviating from the standard. We have a problem. The purpose is not to expect you can imprint everybody in Toyota so they all think the same and they all, like robots, follow all these principles. There's an expectation that people vary, and some people are very mature and some people are just learning, and some of the mature people leave and they're replaced by new people that are less experienced. So there's always going to be turmoil. There's always going to be a big gap between this picture of perfection and what Toyota really is. And the reason Akio Toyoda wanted to go back to the basics is he was seeing that gap and he wanted to shrink the gap. The basics don't mean we go backwards. For example, continuous improvement is the foundation for innovation, which drives us forward. And we only do that if we respect people, develop them, so that they have the skills and the motivation to improve. So, how does Toyota develop people if that's so important? It's so important as part of respect for people. Number one, like the founders of the company, like Taiichi Ohno, you do it at the Gemba. The important learning is at the Gemba. The Gemba could be in a manufacturing plant. The Gemba could be where your customers are using your product. The Gemba could be in a service department. So wherever something is happening that's adding value to your customers, or your customers are using your product, or somebody's making something for you, that's the Gemba. And when there's a problem, you go to where the problem is. If you want to develop people, you develop people at the Gemba where they're going to be working. And the starting point is that you have to learn fundamental skills. This is well known in the crafts. It's well known in the martial arts like karate. It's well known in music that you can't start, for example, we're in a music center. You don't take a person who's never touched a violin and ask them to play a Bach concerto. You show them how to use the bow and how to make a sound. And they do a drill until they can get a somewhat decent sound. Eventually they work their way up to scales, and they play the scales over and over again, if they learn correctly. It's kind of boring, so we try to get them to learn simple songs so that they will keep on practicing. But the songs are so simple they may only take 2 notes. And through practice of these fundamental skills over and over again, they eventually work themselves up to playing an entire piece. And we've heard the magic number of 10,000 hours of practice to become professional. And that 10,000 hours of practice is really practice. It's not just playing. It's doing drills. It's working on your weak points. Now, of course, we all do that at work every day, right? you've defined all your jobs in terms of the fundamental skills, and people come in and they work their way up. Your leaders, you know exactly what the skills your leaders should have, and leaders are constantly doing drills to practice those skills every day. Anybody raise your hand? And because leaders should know. Leadership is not like playing violin. It's not a skill. It's just who you are. It's just the natural. And you should just know how to be a leader. In our culture, with our founder and our distinctive values, you can read the words of the founders, memorize it, and now you know. So the first thing is to learn the fundamental skills, then to learn the details of a particular job where you apply that, and then working on that job, you learn the job, and then eventually learning under a mentor, you learn not only the job, but you learn how to improve on the process. Improving on the process takes a level of skill, because when you're starting, you don't know anything, and you just have to learn how the master tells you to do the job. Once you've mastered at least the basic skills, at that point you can begin to innovate. So as Toyota grew globally, their original model, the original model for doing this was the master-apprentice relationship. When they started plants around the world, and there were only a few, for example in America, they would send hundreds of Japanese to be mentors, to be masters who were teaching the apprentices, and the apprentices were the Americans. And they had one-on-one training, one master for one apprentice. That was true whether you're a supervisor on the shop floor or the plant manager. You had a Japanese teacher teaching you full-time. And they obviously couldn't do that for long as they grew across all these different countries. So eventually, after 2001, there was a lot of innovation to help globalization. And part of that was fundamental skills training to replace the Japanese trainers. This is a part of that. They created a video manual to show you how to do the job. And then they developed places where you could practice scales, do exercises. To the left, they're practicing a fundamental skill of painting smoothly, and to the right, they're practicing a fundamental skill of caulking, putting caulk on a steel door to caulk the gaps. And they do that, and they practice it, and they get tested, and when they pass the test, they move to the next fundamental skill. And eventually, they're brought to the job, and then they have a method called job instruction training that they learned from Americans. It was a method developed in World War II, and it's still being used today exactly the way it was taught in Japan. And the way that this method works is that you have to identify what the job is, what the steps are, what the key points are, and the reasons for the key points, and you have to walk the student through it, learning each step, part of the job until they master it, then teaching them another part of the job, and eventually they learn the whole job. This is the course curriculum for one job. This happens to be for plastic trimming a plastic molded bumper, the extra plastic that shouldn't be there. And you could see that it's very detailed. There's a bunch of steps, and for each step there's a set of key points, and then for each key point there's a reason. And you might learn the first 2 steps, and then step 3 is harder, so you learn that, and then step 4, and then step 5. Generally, they divide the job into quarters. You learn the first quarter, then the second quarter, then the first and second quarter, then the third quarter, then the first, second, and third. And it can easily take weeks to even a month to learn a job like this. And then how you teach leaders, the way that you teach leaders is you have to know what they're supposed to be doing. And what they're supposed to be doing is breaking down the problem, assigning it to subordinates, challenging the subordinates, and then coaching them. So you break down the job into pieces, which is the plan. You then assign the work to the team members based on what you want them to learn and what will be challenging to them. If they've done it already and they're really good at it, you might want to assign it to somebody else. Then you monitor how they're doing, and as you see them struggle, you might give them tips, you might challenge them with questions, And then at the end, when they achieve the goal, you provide feedback and recognition. And then finally, you have to assess how I did as a leader by getting feedback from every place possible. So that's the process by which I, as a leader, say a manager, am teaching my subordinates. That's what they want to teach. And the way they taught it was to start with senior executives and work down. And they first had off-the-job training in a classroom, and they used video examples and case discussion and role-playing because they wanted to make it as practical as possible. Then they sent these people back to work, and they asked them, before they went back to work, they asked them to pick a problem that they were going to work on and pick one person who was going to work on one part of that problem to be their pilot that they're going to especially pay attention to and coach under the eyes of a mentor who was an expert on the-job development. And then they went through the project, and they were getting feedback from the mentor on how they're doing in training this person. For example, if you were to tell the person the answer, that was bad. If you gave the person no feedback and you said, you're empowered, that was bad. So you had to be active, yet not so active that you take over the job. And then it took typically about 8 months at the top levels, the executive, the vice president levels, to get them trained, and then they moved down to the next level. And this has been going on for about 4 years, and they expect it'll be 6 years to get this all through North America. North America was a pilot, and they've been spreading it at the same time into other countries. So this is a deliberate, organized, structured process of teaching on-the-job development by practicing on-the-job development with a coach. And ultimately, problem solving is what drives the company at all levels, whether it's your strategic plans at the top, which are mostly at the senior management level, or whether it's standardized work in Kaizen at the working level. What ties all of these together is the problem-solving process, which really came from Deming, who taught plan, do, check, act as a learning process. You always take the time to plan and understand the problem, the current situation, the standard, and the root causes of the gaps between the standard and the actual. Then you have to come up with something to do, to try, as a possible countermeasure. You try it, then you check what happened, and you learn from that. So the first Prius was the first thing they tried. Actually, they tried a concept car before that. Then they tried the first Prius, then they tried the second Prius, then the third Prius. In the meantime, they were developing hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and electric vehicles, but they were learning on a technology that could actually pass on the market and sell, and that they could use for gaining experience. So that was all PDCA at the level of innovation, fundamental innovation. What Fujio Cho, who eventually became president, said is that it really comes down to three things: going and seeing the actual situation to understand it, and then asking why. Why do we have this problem? And when you think you know the answer, then ask again, is that really the answer, or is there a deeper problem that's leading to this symptom? And then finally, showing respect for people. And the foundation is mutual trust. Each person must be developed. Each team member has to have confidence that the company has the right objectives, that the company's not just using them as a tool so that a few people can get rich. Has to believe in fairness and take problems seriously because we want to help the company, because we're being treated fairly, and we want to treat our team members fairly, and we want to help the company as a whole. And leaders are responsible overall for the mutual prosperity and trust of the entire enterprise. So I've taken my time, a little more than I had my time.